Hi, everybody. It's Kira, teen librarian, and I work at Rawlings. And I'm here for your weekly book talk. It is Women's History Month, and that has influenced what I'm going to be introducing to you. But I want to say, and I should have said this during Black History Month, is that I'm not really a big fan of the sort of month. Basically, American history is Black history, or is at least Black American history. And in the same way, women's history, is international, just like Black history is international. But I don't like the way that sometimes the achievements of these folks can be sort of segmented off into this month when this population has affected all of American history and all of global history for a very, very long time. Sometimes some of the books we can read can teach us about how they were influencing history much earlier than we may have been taught, depending on how old you are, what your schooling is like. But I'm not a big fan of it just being, 1 month of the year. Anyway, I did choose a historical novel for today. It's called White Rose. I'll just hold it up here for you to see. Now, my copy is an ARC, which is an advanced reader's copy, which I got a while ago. It's not a new book, but I don't imagine that much has changed in between this ARC and what eventually came out, which we do have here at the library. It was written by Kip Wilson, and it is a novel, but based on a tremendous amount of research that she did. It's based on a true story. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the book. And yeah. So, it's weird that the blinds behind me, they're slightly weird. But anyway, back to the book. It is narrated in verse, almost entirely by the character of Sophie Scholl, who was a young woman who grew up and lived in Germany, ended up in Munich at university. And she was sort of one of the central figures of the White Rose. Now, what is the White Rose? The White Rose was a secret student German resistance organization that conducted anonymous leaflet drops that called for nonviolent active resistance to the Nazi regime. Now, the book starts, like the first two little paragraphs are actually about her apprehension by the Gestapo and the beginning of her interrogation by the Gestapo. But then it shifts back in time to a period right after her 14th birthday. And so it continually sort of shifts back and forth in her life. And in doing so, Wilson is able to tell Sophie's story of development, right? So when she's younger, she has 4 siblings. They're all pretty close in age. And they have a very happy life. They're close. Their parents are great and supportive, and their entire family is open to discussing what all of them have as strong opinions on everything. They love to spend time outdoors, skiing, hiking. And Sophie loves the outdoors. She is a curious and talented young woman. I just want to read you this one bit that's just a page long. And this is very near the beginning. when we're being introduced to her as younger, living at home. It's called Clipped. I won't ever come close to the German ideal. Long blonde braids, shining blue eyes, thoughts of Kinderküche. I apologize, I don't speak German, so I'm massacring the German words, but thoughts of, and what it means is children kitchen church. And that's sort of the traditional role of a woman in that German society. Instead, I decide to become the most me I can. I bend my head forward, delight in the clip of the scissors, the chunks of hair quietly cascading over my shoulders to the ground below, the scrape of the razor at the bottom of my boyish cut. I aim to become not only the most me, but the best me I can. She is frequently drawing. She reads a great deal, as do her siblings. And Hans is sort of the most important of her siblings. So she has a very strong sense of self-worth. She has ambition and excuse me. And what's really interesting as she's growing up is the way that her opinion and the opinion of her siblings of the Reich shift as they get more information, as they read further, as they witness things or read about things about the Reich. So initially, she is fairly apathetic, as a young person, just enjoying her life, her friends, her family, going outdoors and having a great time. But her consciousness gets raised, and she begins to see that this is actually very dangerous, and eventually decides she has to do something against this. She has to try and stop it. And, as her moral opposition to Nazism sort of gets stronger and stronger and stronger, she's also recalling, really, her earlier sort of inertia in response to different events. The night of broken glass. They knew a lot of Jewish families in their neighborhood, and had positive relationships with them. And yet when she looks back, she sort of can't understand how she just sort of sat by on that night. I mean, it was frightening. She was inside her house. But she wishes she had done something. She was quite young, but she wishes she had done something. And so eventually, her path to college in Munich is interfered with, because now everyone must perform service to the nation. And so her brother actually has to go and fight for 6 months or something like that. He's studying medicine, and then he can come back. So they get letters from him. She's praying for him. And she also has a sort of on-again, off-again boyfriend who that relationship starts when they're both at home. And he is a young lieutenant in the army. And so that's sort of a complicating factor for her. But she continues, whether or not they're in a sort of relationship, she loves him, whether or not that's a romantic love, and wants to stay in touch with him. And so she continues to write to him the whole book, and increasingly writes to him with her more newly formed opinions. And he writes to her about what he's witnessing on the war front, which increasingly disturbs her more and more as he is witnessing atrocity and war crimes and the horrors of war. So once she does get to Munich, her brother Hans is doing this work with the White Rose, but he doesn't actually tell her about it. He's trying to protect her. But once she knows, she sort of says, "No, I don't want you to protect me. I want to do this." And so she gets involved in doing that work. And she sort of dives headfirst into action. So what are these pamphlets, right? They are pamphlets at first when they start doing it, they're sort of intellectually aimed at sort of the intellectuals in German society. They're written as such to try and get them, who are sort of cultural leaders, to turn against the Nazi regime. But then they sort of shift focus. There is one professor, a very popular professor of philosophy, who gets involved in the White Rose. And they later sort of shift to the general public, and they shift the tone. But what they're doing is they're typing up these pamphlets, and then they're using a duplicating machine that was very difficult to get. And then at times they're sending them out in the mail, and they also distribute them on the university campus. So they will put piles right before lectures end. They will put piles of them out, which is quite dangerous. But they're continually doing this, sending them out by mail and putting them in the university so that the university students can read them. So eventually, in one of these sort of dangerous trips to distribute the pamphlets at the university, they've gotten out because no one's really around. Everyone's in the lectures. All the lectures are at the same time, and so they put them at strategic places so that everyone coming out will have them, and then they get out. They get out. They're out of the building, but she realizes that they have more. And so she takes them up, they go back into the building, take them up to the highest, and just as it's, the lectures are pretty close to getting out, they just chuck a bunch off the top floor, so they'll just sort of sprinkle down. And it's then that they get caught. And they're turned into the Gestapo. And the Gestapo, who has been hunting the White Rose for quite some time, because their work had been quite widespread and was known about by the Gestapo, and the Gestapo obviously wants to catch them because they're being treasonous, as the Gestapo would put it. And so then we go back to the very beginning where the book begins, and we end up seeing more of that, their interrogation, and eventually they end up confessing. But they're careful. They try to be very careful about how they confess and not implicate people. And it's quite interesting how she sort of tells the truth, peppered with lies, and does it sort of very well until things change and they end up confessing. And she makes some very strong statements in her interrogation and in her confession. Though the confession is written out for her, but on the back, she writes about freedom and adds her own sort of mark to it. And they are tried, and it's an absurd trial, not surprisingly, and their defenders are sort of just hopeless. There's nothing they can do. All they want is really for Sophie to just blame Hans so she can get off with going to jail, when actually, the sentence for treason is death. But they are both convicted and both killed. And I don't think I'm giving anything away by doing this, because it is based on history. And she did an enormous amount of historical research. The novel is also really exciting. You get to see them doing the dangerous production of these pamphlets in their apartment, and their other friends who are part of this group who write some, who help in every stage of it. But they are sort of the driving force, with another guy, Alex, who gets away, but not forever. He does get caught later. And there's another friend who has very young children, and he gets caught, and they feel absolutely terrible because he's a young father, and they don't think that he should die. His children won't have a father. Anyway, it's very moving. But so the dangerous production of the pamphlets, and the even more dangerous sort of work of getting the pamphlets out there. So at times they will take trains to other cities and buy stamps at various places, get envelopes wherever they can get them, and mail them in others. But they will go to the other cities to do that. And they will also do the work at Unix University. And that is always sort of exciting, and you're always afraid they're going to get caught. And and so it's an exciting story, but it's also what's also great about this story and the way it's been written, sort of shifting back and forth in time, is that we get to see the closest thing to the awakening of conscience of just a German person, who she herself is not under threat by the Nazi regime because of her religion or her sexuality, her ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There were many groups that the Nazis targeted, but she herself is not a part of any of those groups. And yet her sort of movement to, that I think is in a sense the most interesting part of this story, about this just being your life, and this is what the government's doing, and the government isn't also telling you everything. And so discovering how horrible this regime is, and the horrible things it is doing, and making the choice to act against it, but all having to reckon with the fact that in the past, you didn't do anything. There were events at which she was young, but there was a sort of apathy, and she has to sort of morally deal with that as well. And so I think that makes it a very compelling story. And her last hope, as she's going to be executed, is that somehow her execution and the execution of the other leaders will lead to, the German public rising up against the regime. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But, more recently, the White Rose has received a good amount of attention in pop culture, in history, in every realm. In Germany, there are lots of schools, streets. There's a political science institute in Munich named for Hans and Sophie. And there have been films, theater productions about various parts of what the White Rose did and what happened to them. Musicians have featured the shows in their productions and in their recordings. And of course, there've been so many books written, mostly in German and in Germany, histories, etc., about the White Rose. There is, I believe, a sculpture of Sophie in Germany. And also after, the figures of the White Rose were all executed or sort of minor figures were imprisoned, there were a couple of students who tried to get it going again. And also the Allies had seen these pamphlets and the Allies had gotten some of these pamphlets. So the Allies started showering them down on towns from planes. So it's a fascinating story. And Sophie Scholl is a fascinating woman from history, fighting for some kind of justice. It's also a great book. It's not difficult to read. For those who aren't super into reading history, it's historical fiction that's exciting, and you become attached to these characters, also to her father and mother. Her father is in prison for a while because he spoke out about Hitler to a powerful man in business. So he gets put in prison for a while, which makes it quite hard on the family. But it's a great read and an eye-opening read if you don't know about the White Rose. It's a great story of young people really engaging politically in ways that are dangerous to themselves, but they think that morally they can't just stand by and do nothing, even though they are not under direct threat. So they try to work, they're living in Germany. They try to do what they can from within Germany to resist the Nazi regime and everything that regime did. So I encourage you to read it. It is a great read and a great book. And yeah, so White Rose. I'm not sure. I think we have one paper copy in the library system, and I think it is also available as an ebook. I would definitely check it out. I'm so glad I read it. I read it last week, even though I've had this arc forever. I didn't read it until last week, and I was like, why didn't I read this for so long? It's so great. But yeah, for anyone who checked into my demo earlier this week, I want to apologize for, well, it took me a long time to demonstrate it successfully. I've had a tough week, to be honest. When I went in to start the demo, I was feeling really anxious, and that doesn't help when you're trying something for the first time. So I kept overcomplicating it, and the first, who knows how many times I kept messing it up because I was overcomplicating it instead of, it's really quite simple steps from each picture, the next picture, but I was making it far more complicated than it needed to be. But anyway, if you have that, and if you haven't done it yet, honestly, the pictures, they're not that different, and they're showing individual steps. They're not showing anything crazy. So don't do what I did and try and imagine it showing you something more complicated than it is. And it was sort of an example of, how anxiety can affect how you do things. I felt rushed. I felt under pressure to do this properly. I had done it once before, and suddenly it felt like, how did I do this before? Why is this so hard? I don't remember this being so hard. And then that got me more anxious, and I was seeing all these complicated things I had to do, and I was thinking, oh, this is far too hard. Why did I choose this? And then, eventually I sort of had to take a deep breath and say, it's okay if you mess it up. You just try again. And, I was able to calm down enough to just realize that they were simple steps that I was overcomplicating, and I was able to actually do it. Though I imagine it wasn't that much fun to watch. So I apologize if it wasn't much fun to watch, because I wasn't in a great place in my head, and I think that probably came off. But yeah, I just wanted to share with you that I've been having kind of a tough week. And I can't think of why exactly it's been so tough. I mean, I'm busy at work, but I've been busy at work before. I think it's just the sort of the pandemic fatigue. And my parents get their first shot today, which is a big relief for me. They're both over 75. They live in Pennsylvania. And that's been making me anxious. But anyway, just so you know, everybody is suffering from what can seem like sort of confusing and weird anxiety, and the behaviors that anxiety can produce in just going about your day. And, it's been taking me longer to get things done because I'm anxious, and, it makes me sort of less able to focus, or sort of all over the place in my brain. I do talk to my mother every day, and I talk to a counselor. So I want to tell you that there's absolutely no shame in asking for help. I've had a bad week. It hasn't been alarmingly bad for me, but I have experienced alarmingly bad feelings in my life. And it is of critical importance that when that happens, you ask for help. There's no shame in it. It's actually brave. You're not alone. You're not alone in feeling isolated, and feeling frustrated, and feeling anxious, and not really understanding why you're feeling bad, but feeling very bad. And if you're feeling really, really bad, and you're sort of starting to have some thoughts of self-harm, you definitely need to reach out for help, okay? There's no shame in it, and nobody wants to lose you, okay? I don't want to lose you. I might not ever have met you, but if the world loses you, I never will meet you, and I will never get to know how brilliant you are. And there's nothing I want more than to know how brilliant you are and to learn from you. So please ask for help, okay? With that, my book talk is finished. Everybody here at the library feels the same way that I do about you guys taking care of yourselves and asking for help when you need it, okay? So I'm going to sign off, and I'm going to take the rest of my little break and take a walk outside. It's probably not as warm as it was, but that's okay. I'll take another walk outside, get some fresh air, and then head back to work. So I want everybody to get outside when it's warm enough to be outside and nice, and not be freezing, which it's getting more and more when the sun is up. And try to do the things that make you feel joy. Just for, a few minutes every day, make sure you do something that gives you joy, or that makes you feel good. Okay? Maybe that's just helping somebody out. Making somebody smile. That can feel really good. So I will see you next week, and take care. That's your goofy teen librarian who wasn't feeling super goofy today, but me signing off. Take care.